Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Meet the Author webinar series. Our topic today is genealogy. The book is called Family History Treasure Hunt, and it was developed by Ohio State University. My name's Elena Massler. I'm with the National 4-H Council, and I'll be your moderator today. I have just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. The first is that if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, which we hope you aren't, I'm going to put a link in the chat box, and you can go to the Zoom site to check that out. If you're still having any trouble, type in the chat, and hopefully I'll be able to help you. I also wanted to point out that we will be using the chat box as well as the Q&A box. So if you have any questions for our presenters today or any comments, feel free to use those boxes as appropriate. And with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. So I'm pleased today to introduce Jane Wright. She's the curriculum manager with Ohio 4-H, and she will introduce our presenter today. And I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Elena. I want to take a moment and introduce Deb Kitko. Deb lives here in Ohio, in Worcester, Ohio, and has been a genealogy librarian for over 20 years and certified genealogy librarian since 2006. She comes to us as a volunteer author, so we're very appreciative of her willingness to share her expertise. It's quite amazing, as you are about to see. The other thing that she does, she volunteers her time at the Ohio State Fair and helps judge these projects. So thank you, Deb. I won't spend any more on that. Oh, but I do want to mention the other contributors. Deb led an incredible team of volunteers, all of them experts in their own right, including Jane Davis, Laura Ford, Susan Leninger, Perry Palumbo, Elizabeth Plummer, Russ Pollitt, and Christine Walton. All of them were contributors and sometimes reviewers, and all of the content has definitely seen more than one set of eyes. So thanks so much, Deb. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Okay,
oh, actually, this one is my slide too.
It is.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the book. What's most notable, I think, about this book is that it covers 6 years of activities. Yes, that's right. It's kind of very unusual for Ohio to produce a book like this. But genealogy so much builds on what you do from year to year that this was really the only way to go. I think our previous edition did 3 years, or maybe 4, but we've expanded it to 6. There are guidelines for what should happen every year of the project. There's a lot of flexibility in there, and Deb will share some of the details there. It says on this slide, youth in grades 6 to 12. We bill it as kind of appropriate for all skill levels, meaning someone who doesn't know anything about genealogy and hasn't explored the topic before could start with this book, but also anyone with some experience in genealogy would find plenty of things to do. Covers appropriate sources. I love this, allows for alternative family arrangements. That's a big feature or a big challenge sometimes in genealogy these days. It includes forms. And as I said, 6 years of activities. It is member-directed, meaning that it's intended to be completed by a 4-H member working alone with the help of a project helper. So we've had it for this revised edition for just about a year. It is big, 72 full-color pages. Okay. Thank you, Deb. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Jane. We're going to spend a couple minutes talking about just the table of contents here. Although it's really recommended for for grades 6 through 12, we've had people as young as 9 years old participate in the project, and the first year I judged at the state level, it was awesome. I did have a 9-year-old actually participate, and she did an awesome job. You could tell she had a lot of help from either a project helper or from someone within her family. So if you do start at that young age, it really is imperative that you have a lot of guidance with you as you're going through the project. In terms of the first area of the book is called Treasure Hunt Basics, and this is where we're just trying to introduce the concept of genealogy and family history to the youth. So we start with yourself as being the researcher, and then you fill out, for the first year you focus on the parents and then the grandparents. And there's like a family traits chart in there too, which gives you an idea. You can actually do comparisons about, like my eyes are blue and my grandparents' eyes were blue. So you can actually see some characteristics that may have been handed down through the line. So this is usually a pretty fun exercise for the kids to work on. And this is all part within the first few pages of the 4-H booklet at the Ohio level. The main part of the book covers the treasure hunt tools. And with this, we start out, there's about 8 suggestions that we provide in this book. We do provide some working forms for the students or for the youth, and those are usually included in the appendix. And those maybe include like a blank form of like a family group sheet, a blank form of an ancestor chart, and a few of those. And we're going to be looking at a couple of these examples throughout the program, throughout the webinar today. We also want to focus a lot on documenting sources. This has been a key part of the state judging, and even working as a genealogy librarian, we really struggle a lot with people coming in and they forget to document where they came up with their information. So as the 4-H project, one of the things that the state judges at the Ohio level pay attention to would be the source documentation. Where did you get that information? Was it handed down through a family member? Did you find it on Ancestry as like a compiled genealogy? Did you actually do the research and try to find the marriage record or an actual birth or death record online? So those are what I mean in terms of documenting, just telling where you came up with the information. We also encourage our youth to take notes on like a separate piece of paper. For example, if they're researching, maybe their family on John Smith, they want to have one paper that would have notes that cover that area. And then as part of the organization, they can add that note page to their folder. So they can actually pull that out and see what they have done and what they still need to do to research further on that ancestor. With today's age, we also recommend that you get a photocopy or scan in images of documents. And we prefer doing this over getting an abstract or a transcription, because a lot of times when you're in a hurry, when you're looking at the document, you may miss over some major details. And sometimes those details is what will lead you to additional information. So if you have a scanned copy of that image or a photocopy, then you can always go back at a later point and take a look and see, oh yeah, here's where who the informant is and how this informant may tie in with the family. We also encourage, for our youth to keep their files organized. This will help out with the process from day 1, clear through, if they go clear through the year 6. You have to know what you have in order to know where to go for the next step. And if you keep it well organized, that will help through that process. We also have a few sample questions that they can ask family members, because of course when youth are just starting out, you hope that they still have their parents or their grandparents around, or aunts and uncles, or even maybe some cousins, and they can begin asking questions. Well, you need to know what kind of questions to ask in order to get a little more insight into the family. And we usually encourage them to answer the question like who, what, when, where, why, and how. Sort of like the general friendly type questions. Although they're getting information from the family, we also try to encourage the youth to try to document that. So if they say that, that their grandfather was born in, maybe 1930, for example, you may want to try to get a hold of a birth record to just verify that information, or a marriage record to verify when he was married. And that's just so you have that record and have that documented in your information. A lot of times whenever people are interviewing, they may be off by a year or two in terms of the date. So it's also very important to verify that information as well through the actual documents. I also want to encourage the youth to keep an open mind when they are doing some research, because as I often tell individuals when I'm teaching classes, the clerks and the recorders of the information were not spelling bee champs. They actually would spell the name how it sounded to them. And so, for example, with my one of my surnames that I researched for my family is McElwain. It was originally spelled M-U-C-K-L-E-W-A-I-N. And through the years, it's now been brought down to just Wayne, W-A-Y-N-E, or I've seen it spelled as W-A-I-N, depending on how the information was recorded. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind. And if you think that, your name's always been spelled this way, and you go with that philosophy when you're doing research, you're going to come to what we call a genealogy brick wall, and you're not going to be able to go beyond that brick wall. So it's important to just keep that that mind open in terms of the spelling, not only with the surnames, which is the last name, but also with the first names. Because a lot of times you may use middle names instead of the first names in the records. And, you know, if you're looking for a Mary Elizabeth Smith, for example, you may find her underneath Mary, you may find her underneath Elizabeth, or you may find her underneath Eliza or Libby or Lizzie. And if you're so keyed in on the exact names, then you're going to miss a lot of information. So, so we try to cover a little bit of that within like the treasure hunt tools. The next part is the conducting your search. And this is where we're giving some information in terms of where can you find the information. Yes, you start at home, and there's a lot of resources you may have at home you may not realize you have. But we also try to go beyond, especially for the more advanced years, in terms of understanding that source. You know, is it primary? Does it include primary information or secondary information? Is it an original source? Is it a derivative source? That kind. So this, you know, we don't focus too much on that during the first couple years, but as the students progress or as the youth progress through their project, it becomes very important for them to have a better understanding about the documents that they obtain, why the documents are formed, and why they may have different answers on the documents. So that's very important for them as well. We do give several examples of how to cite resources in the book. This is just one example. The main thing is, I wouldn't get so hung up on the exact way to cite the sources. The main thing is if they give enough information that if someone who is looking at the research can actually recreate the research based on their source documentation, okay? So for example, for like a census record, you may include like 1850 census for Chippewa Township, Wayne County, Ohio, and give a particular page number. That would be sufficient in order to try to find that record again. So although we focus a lot on documenting, we want to make sure, you know, you don't get so caught up with the semicolons and the periods and where that's at. The main thing is if someone can recreate the research you have done to verify that information that you have researched. We also give a list of a few possible repositories that you can find information. We give some examples of websites in there. Anymore, there's so much information that's available on the internet that, you know, the youth can actually access a lot of this information from home at their convenience, especially through websites such as Family Search and Ancestry.com. And then, of course, we have a little section on preserving your family papers and photographs, and then a little bit about the modern family with a link that would give you to some pedigree charts and family group sheets that are designed for those non-traditional families. Then we have a list in here of the appendixes with the abbreviations, master copies, some checklists, just some basic information. We have a glossary with some of the very basic terminology that the students will need whenever they're going through their process. And then, of course, the back cover, we have the summary of learning outcomes. Okay, quite a bit on that page. This is on pages 6 and 7 of the Ohio 4-H book. We actually have an example of the first year requirements, and we have this broken down between letters A through L, and these are pretty much standard at this point, 4 levels for the first year through the 5th year. The 6th year, there's a lot of flexibility for the students. They can sort of design their own project and know where they're going from, so we didn't put too much criteria in for that. But for example, you know, for getting started for the first year, you know, we asked them to complete a 3-generation pedigree chart, which would be themselves, their parents, and their grandparents. And there's a sample form within the booklet itself that they can actually fill out. We also have a sample family group sheet where they're actually listing their siblings and their information. And then what's in the name, and then family trait chart, just some of the key things. The second section is on organizing your search. And this is where we try to encourage the youth to actually get their stuff organized from the start and maybe create their notebook and have it divided into sections, etc. The third section is on interviewing, and we usually give different guidelines for each of the years in terms of who they may want to interview. For maybe, for example, the first year they're interviewing their parents or maybe their grandparents. The second year they may want to expand and interview like a cousin or like a great aunt or maybe another grandparent that they hadn't covered before. In terms of section D, this is your known and your missing information, and this sort of connects with organizing your research, because you have to know what you have and what you're missing in order to know what the next step would be. And so this is just a section for the students to actually get used to trying to take a look at what they do have and determine what is known and what they're actually needing to find information, which will lend itself to section G, which is the research plan, which we'll get to in just a couple of minutes here. We also, in section E, we have a training session, and these may involve learning new technology, or maybe trying to teach someone with, that they find this new app and they want to share it with their friend. They may be encouraged to do that as part of the step. They may want to learn what microfilm is. A lot of times, the youth of today have no idea what microfilm is. And so we try to encourage them to go to a library that may actually house microfilm so they actually see it firsthand and see how we used to store information prior to the Facebook page and before the internet. Microfilm is still the #1 way to preserve information. So we're trying to bridge that gap. If you talk to someone, who's older, you say a 35mm camera, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. But if you talk to someone who's, a 9-10-year-old about what a 35mm camera, they just sort of scratch their head. It's like, what's that? Because they've grown up in the digital age so much. And that also ties in with using the equipment as well. With the research plan, you're basing this information based on what you have organized, what you know, what you don't know, and you actually try to think through and see, okay, well, this is the information, this is the question I'd like to focus on for this year of the project. And this is maybe some of the sources I like to go to try to find this information. And this source that I can find may be available online, or I may have to ask my parents to drive me to the local library or to a cemetery to try to get the information. So this is all part of that research plan. We also try to encourage the students to correspond. This is a great life skill that they learn as well, because we encourage them to write a letter. Of course, we are all also open that they can contact an individual through email or through some other way through the social media. But actually writing letters is becoming a long lost art. And so we want to try to encourage them. It's like that sometimes, there's some places that do not have email, believe it or not, and you may have to actually sit down and write a letter, and you have to know how to address the letter. Someone had indicated to me a few years ago that they had one of their students send out a survey, and they were so pleased that they got 100% response. Well, they came and looked at the letters, at the envelopes, and they discovered that the student had addressed the envelopes incorrectly. They had the address where it's supposed to go to the place that it came from. So this is one thing that we sort of want to focus with the correspondence. It's like, there is an art to writing letters still. It hasn't been long gone yet. But like I said, we also want to recognize we are in the 21st century, and you still may correspond through email and other means. And then section L is definitely covering with the research, and this is the big hub, and this is the part that probably takes the longest time for the youth. This is where they actually may have to go online and try to find those records to try to document and verify the information that they've been handed down through the family. The research may involve, using the internet, or it may involve actually visiting a library, a genealogical or historical society. Maybe if there's a local archive in the area, they can visit there. They may actually have a chance to interview the librarian there, or when the archivist, which falls underneath the interviewing category. So we sort of try to change it a little bit each year, so it's something new and fresh for the youth as we go through.
Well, you know what, Deb, you kind of bring up a good point there, because this looks very daunting to someone who hasn't done it before. It looks like it's an incredible amount of work. Oh my gosh, I have to do 30 or 40 different things here. But when I've learned over time that many of these things complement each other, and that while you're trying to do one thing, you're going to be able to complete another. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. For example, with the training session, you can actually combine the training session and using the equipment all in one, because you can learn this piece of equipment, and then you actually have to ask how to use it, and you may want to pass on that information, which may lead into like the learning experience or leadership, citizenship, which is like steps 2 or 3 within this project.
Yeah,
also you'll see, also you realize that you're writing the correspondence, which lends to the interviewing process, and so there's a lot of the sections that actually lend themselves to each other, and they really complement each other. So you're right, Jane, they really complement each other in terms of this project. And I'm going to estimate it may take a beginner maybe 10 to 20 hours estimated to get through this. Of course, it's going to depend on how easily they can find the information and how much information they had to begin with. So that's just an estimate. I've never actually timed it myself, so I'm just taking a guess based on my experience how much it may, how much
That's
time.
a pretty big range, though. 10 to 20 hours probably covers it.
It does. Okay, we can move on to the next slide there. So this is what I was referring to, steps 2 and 3 and 4. But let's go back up before we cover those. We actually have an annual essay. So every year we try to encourage the youth to write an essay. For year 1, it's like my personal history. Later on, it may be where they actually choose one of their ancestors and they write a biographical sketch on an individual. And this is just so they get a chance to actually they can actually use the research they've done and apply that to the essay that they're writing. So once again, it's complementing each other. So they do the research and they write up a brief narrative about what they have found in terms of their research, and then they have that to say for their family history for future generations. We also want them to share the information. You may want to copy and share your pedigree chart or your family group sheet with some other family members. Or if you have a family member that may not be necessarily interested in it, you may want to check with your local library or local genealogical historic society. A lot of times we're willing to take on, add those family group sheets and pedigree charts to our files so other people who can come in researching the same name can actually have something to help them get started. And then steps 2, 3, and 4, you cover learning experience, leadership, citizenship activity, project evaluation. These are pretty typical of most of the 4-H projects, so we usually leave this area up to the individual to their youth, as well as to the project leader to help guide them through this section of it. But it's definitely really important, especially for step 4, to evaluate their project and for the record keeping, because if they don't know what they've done from year 1, they're not going to be able to continue on in year 2. So they have to see where the strengths were, what their weaknesses were, and just take an assessment and see, okay, this one didn't work out this way, so maybe I can improve this for next year. So it's very important for them to evaluate their project, how they've done, and where they may want to go for continuing on for the next year. Okay. These were the pages I mentioned about getting started, where you have the treasure hunt basics. This is like the basic 3-generation chart here on the page 12, where you have, my name, and then my father and my mother, and then my father's father and my mother's mother, that type of thing. So we have the students work this out, and this is their introduction to a pedigree chart. And the pedigree charts can be found in 3, 4, 5, 8 generation, as far up as 15 generations. We don't go that far with this 4-H booklet unless the youth decides to go that far. They may actually have that kind of success and be able to go another, 8 generations back. That's up to the individual and how much they want to spend time on doing the research. What's in the name here? This is talking about, my full name is, I was born on. So this is like a basic introduction to what we call the family group sheet, where you're trying to put a family unit together where you have a father, a mother, and then you have the children. And a lot of times, researchers don't want to focus on the other children, except you eventually will need to in your research. And we're going to talk about that here in a few slides. The third slide here is like on the, at the top you see list brothers and sisters. Once again, this is going back to the family group sheet model. And then you have the family trait chart, where they're actually taking a look at, in terms of what characteristics do my parents have, what characteristics does my grandfather have or my grandmother has. It's sort of like a fun exercise for them to begin thinking and observing different things about their family. Okay, this is an example of a 5-generation chart. And I actually printed this out from Roots Magic, which is a genealogy software program. And yes, the students are permitted to use software programs in this project. They just have to make sure they print the stuff out, because at the state level, we do not want them to bring their electronic devices with them. We're just afraid that they may get lost or damaged in some way. So we do, if they want to do it through a software program, that's fine, or online, they can do that, but we just ask that they print out copies and add to their 4-H booklet, to their notebook. So here, number 1 you'll see would be my grandmother, and I filled in what information that we have on her. And the top half of the family is going to be for her father's side of the family, and the bottom half is for the mom's side. And it's okay if you cannot fill in all the missing pieces. This is just a snapshot tool of what information you have, and it also gives you a clue about what information you may need to try to find throughout your project, whether it's year 1, year 2, year 3, or clear through year 6. And even if you don't have the exact dates, even you estimate, say that they may have been born 1920s, at least you can put that down. And I'd encourage you, if you are using the paper format, to use pencil to fill that in, because if you're anything like me, I'm not perfect, and sometimes, I get the facts a little bit goofed up, and if you have it in pencil, you can always erase it. If you're using a software program, you just go in and you can edit it and then reprint out a fresh copy of it. And this one, usually a couple other things you want to make a notation here. You'll notice that all the surnames are in capital letters, and this is very important because a lot of times family members will give their surname as a middle name for their child. And so if you have the surname all in caps, it sort of pulls that out, saying that this is a surname, not necessarily a given name or a middle name. The other thing you'll notice is that the standard date format, we actually use the days and the first 3 letters of the month and the 4-year digit. And this is pretty much standard in genealogy. And this is so people do not get confused, because, if you'd give the date, for example, 3/1/47, you don't know if that's going to be March 1st of 1947, or is it going to be January 3rd of 1847 or 1747. So it's very important that you have the standard format, so people understand that you're getting the month and the year and the date all correct. If you're fortunate enough to go back further than 5 generations, at least on this particular chart, then the individual, you can go back like a 6th generation, now becomes number 1 on a new chart. So example, on this chart, for number 26, we have Parley Rummer. And we know he was born in 1797, died 1865. And we do know that his parents are Elias Rummer and Marjorie Judd. And so, but there's no other room on this chart. So number 26 is going to be, you're going to get out a fresh pedigree chart, and number 26, Parley Rummer, now becomes number 1. On chart number 22, for example, chart number 3, however you decide to number your charts. You see up here where the red circle is that there's a chart number, and number 1 on this chart is the same as number, blank on chart number. And this is how you can keep track of the many pedigree charts you may compile throughout your 6-year project. So so Parley number 26 on this chart would become Parley Rummer number 1 on a new chart, and then Elias Rummer, his father, would become number 2, and Marjorie would become number 3. You also want to use the mother's maiden name on the chart, or the wife's maiden name, because you're wanting to go further back on her side, and so you need to know what her maiden name would be in order to continue that process. Okay. Okay, the next one, this is a family group sheet. This is where I'm talking about where you're actually wanting to create the family unit. So here's Robert Martin Reed. He'd be my great-grandfather, and I have his information listed here. And on the family group sheet, you also have his father's been Orson, mother's Lydia Ann Reynolds, and this program automatically puts in the birth year and the death year. And if you are actually doing a written format, you may want to include those years on your family group sheet as well, because families were not very original in the naming of their kids. This will help distinguish one James Reed or Lydia Reed from another Lydia Reed, for example. On this one, this is showing that Robert Martin Reed was actually first married in 1888. He then divorced his first wife and married a second wife, and this Martha Elizabeth is his second wife. Now, with my family, with my grandmother, she always believed that all of her siblings, whether they're half siblings or full blood siblings, they're still her siblings. So she actually taught me early on that it's important to not only research your biological family, but you may want to research your half family, for example, or your step family as well, because you may find clues within those family members that may lead you back to your direct ancestor. On this one, you'll have the father at the top, you have the mother, the second line down there, and then you list all the kids. And with this particular marriage, they had 5 kids. And although 2 of the kids did not live into adulthood, you go ahead and include those on your list as well. And usually with the family group sheet, you start with the oldest child and you go down to the youngest child. So you see here my grandmother, Dorothy Reed, she was the youngest. between her father's first marriage, her mom's first marriage, and then this marriage. She's actually the youngest of 20 kids. And she was an excellent resource when I first started back in high school doing this project. She just was phenomenal at remembering the names of all of her siblings, the dates, etc. So for those youth that are getting started with this, if you have your grandparents, take advantage of, really take time and visit with them and have them help you with this project. They may say, well, I don't know for sure, but if you begin, maybe giving some clues, that all of a sudden something will trigger their mind and they're like, oh yeah, that's right, I remember this now. So this, other family groups, you should also have a place to put, the church affiliation, military record, occupation, and these can all be beneficial when you're doing research. And this is for more of the advanced students, and I'm not going to cover that at this point because we still have a couple more slides to go through. Okay, this is some of the key sources that we try to talk to kids into looking in first, or at least we request them to consider be obituaries, vital records, census records, and court records. And a lot of the stuff you may find online through such sites as FamilySearch.org and Ancestry.com, or if you visit the library, Ancestry Library Edition. The obituaries are a good way to try to find out some biographical information on the individual in terms of their community involvement. You may find the parents' names there. You may find the survivors that may give you clues into where to go next for your research. For your vital records, this includes the birth, marriages, and deaths. And many of these can be found on Family Search. But I do want to make a notation that each state differed in terms of when they're required to start the vital records. For example, here in Ohio, births and deaths started to be recorded in 1867, and in about December 1908, the actual state took over, and so you're going to find more information on the records, on especially the death records after December 1908. In Ohio, the marriages were actually being recorded at the time that the county was formed. For example, Wayne County, we were established in 1812, so our marriages started in 1812. However, if you're doing research over in Pennsylvania, they did not require marriage records to be recorded until the 1880s. So you'll have to make sure you do your research and find out in terms of the state that you're doing research in, when the records were first recorded. You also have to take into consideration of privacy issues, because there's some states that will not release a lot of the personal information for like 50 years or 100 years after the event. So once again, do your homework on your vital records, see when the records were first recorded, and to follow through on that. The census records, you have the federal records, you have state census records, and sometimes you'll have the local records. And the federal census records and state records are usually found on Ancestry.com, and some can be found on Ancestry and Family Search are the two main sources. Family Search being free for people to access from home. Ancestry is a subscription database. And of course, the federal census here in the United States covered starting in 1790, and they are taken every 10 years. However, the most recent one available for public viewing would be the 1940 census. So the family information can currently be found on 1940. However, if you're looking for your family on a 1950 census, you'll have to wait to the year 2022 to access the detailed information on that. Now, if you're doing Canadian research, they have a different set of rules in terms of how long after the event takes place when they'll release the information, or over in England, etc. So if you're doing international research, once again, do your research and find out what the requirements are for that particular area.
Hey, Deb, I have a question. Mm-hmm. It's so phenomenal that Wayne County has you and other people like you at the library. How likely is it that a project helper and 4-H member would be able to find local guidance?
It's going to depend on the county. Okay. We are very fortunate here at our library that our leadership has seen the value in genealogy, and so we actually have 3 full-time staff in our department. Wow. Now, if you go to our adjacent county over in Ashland County or down in Holmes County, they do not have a designated staff member to help with genealogy. They may operate on volunteers. And that may be something you have to be aware of when you're going visiting a public library or to a genealogical or historical society. They may be based on volunteer help, which means if you're making a trip, you may want to contact them first to make sure there's going to be someone available to help you.
Okay, just wanted to check that out. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, and court records, you can find those now through Family Search and Ancestry as well. And this would include like wills, estates, guardianships. This one is not too much of a focus on the first or second year, but once you get into the third year and beyond, you're going to really begin focusing more on the court records, military records, and some of the other specialty areas that can provide additional information on your family. Just a couple of best practices. Judging 4-H projects, I discovered that a lot of kids go on to Ancestry.com and they look at the compiled genealogies and they see that this is their family and they just sort of copy it and they repackage it into a nice little neat notebook. I do not want to encourage this practice. It's okay to use the compiled genealogies as a guide because sometimes that may be the only place you can move on to the next step. If you are using the compiled genealogy, you want to make sure that you are verifying the information. Make sure they're including their source citations there. If there's a contact information, try to reach out, contact that individual to see if they do have the proper documentation. Too many times when you're looking at the compiled genealogies, I have seen that you may have a 60-year-old woman giving birth to a newborn, which in the 1800s was near impossible. Or you may find that, you know, there is someone getting married before they're even born. And so this is some of the common errors I find in the compiled genealogies. So basically, look over the compiled genealogy, make sure it makes sense biologically. If there's something that doesn't make sense, please go back and verify the information and see where the error may be. And I really want to, I cannot stress that enough, not only for youth, but even for adults who are doing research. It's very important just to use your common sense and see what does make sense. Also, you want to make sure you want to cite your sources. A lot of times in a genealogy librarian, someone has made a copy of a page, but they did not include the source citation. So they come into their department with this copy and they're like, do you know where I got this information from? And thankfully I've been here, you know, long enough that I can usually pinpoint what book it was. But if you have someone, if you're going to visit a department or visiting someplace that does not have the help or the expert help that we have here locally, they're going to be clueless. So make sure you cite your sources, indicate, you know, where you got your information. Include the title, you know, the author. If you're getting it online, include the website, include when you access the information, etc. You also want to make sure you view the original sources. Ancestry and Family Search have a lot of good abstracts, but the abstracts have a lot of errors. So if there's any way possible to view the original, go to the original document and look at the writing yourself. And you know, you may need some help from your parents or from your grandparents to read the handwriting because a lot of the early records were written in cursive. And a lot of kids working on this project may not be too comfortable with reading the cursive handwriting. So this is where you may actually have to depend on an older individual to help you out with your project. I also just want to make a notation. Last year on a blog I was reading, Dick Eastman blog, it indicated that less than probably about 10% of the resources available for family historians are available online. That means there's 90% of information available at the local level that you're not going to find online. So if you're one of these Jews that, you know, just don't want to, you know, who just can't get a ride, yeah, you can do a lot of research online, but as you advance through this booklet, there's a good chance you are going to actually have to make a visit to those local libraries or to the local repository, to a courthouse, you know, to a record center, to an archives, because you're going to find a gem of information, a treasure chest full of information at the local level that's not going to be available online. So if at all possible, try to visit the location of your ancestors and see what you can find at the local level as well. Don't depend solely on the internet. The internet is not the alpha, the omega of research. It's just one more tool for genealogists to use.
Actually, Deb, I have a question on that before we go to the next slide. How do the sites like Ancestry and Family Search compile their data? Is it kind of like crowdsourced, or are they getting information from actual like government organizations or courts themselves?
Okay, with Family Search, they're actually hosted through the Latter-day Saints or the Mormons, and they've been going around internationally since 1930s microfilming records. So Family Search is going to have a lot of original records, civil registration such as births, deaths, marriages. They're going to have a lot of original land deeds to look at, original court records, etc. on there. And of course, they're actually posting this stuff available free of charge for the end user to access. Ancestry, on the other hand, is a subscription database, so they actually go out and they look for different database tools.
Mhm.
So Ancestry is a umbrella for a lot of individual databases, and they actually go out and seek permission. And sometimes they have to purchase the data to add to Ancestry. Now, the other aspect of both Family Search and Ancestry would be the compiled genealogies, and these are all done by individuals such as you and me, who have just submitted the information. So the information is only as accurate as how well the researcher has done the research.
Okay.
Does that
Yeah,
help clarify that?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, just a few, we're kind of rounding home base here. In terms of best practice, as some takeaways here, with this project as kids, they really learn how to develop some life skills. They're learning how to communicate. They're, instead of sitting at the dinner table, looking at their iPad or their telephone or the smartphone, maybe they want to converse with their parents or the grandparents about, what life was like growing up and that kind of thing. So, you try to encourage that communication, not only orally, but also in a written format. Written, not only letters, but also emails. They want to learn how to actually properly cite sources, and this can be very important for high school projects and later on into the college years when they actually have to do a thesis or a dissertation or a research paper. So they're learning the fundamentals at this point, maybe as young as 9 years old, in terms of how important source documentation is. In addition, with the genealogy project, they learn how to think critically. They have to take a look at the information and see, does this make sense? Or is it possible that this 8-year-old great-great-great-grandfather of mine actually served as a drummer boy in the Civil War? Is this even a likely scenario? Or if not, what else is going wrong? So they have to sort of think through and see, does this make sense? And of course, early on I mentioned that they want to evaluate the information. This project builds from year 1 to year 2 to year 3. So they build on the years acquired in year 1, and then year 2 will build on what you learned in year 1. Year 3 will build on what you learned in year 2 as well as year 1. So it just continues on. And so they have to learn how to evaluate, see where they're at in terms of the research, see what they can do over the next year to prepare for the next year's project. They may also increase their knowledge about their personal identity, who really are, who are they, who were their ancestors. They may learn an appreciation for history. All of a sudden, that Civil War that they learned about in school doesn't mean anything until they can now put their great-great-great ancestor as serving in the Civil War. So now there's that tie, that personal tie with that actually history. So it sort of brings history to life for them. So you also, they have to decide on the value of the information, if it's good, if it's bad, if it's sort of iffy. So they learned that within this project. And hopefully overall, they just enjoy the thrill of the hunt of trying to find the resources, to trying to find the records, to try to go back from one generation to another. I'm passionate about genealogy. I have been for years. And I'm hoping that some of these kids, when they get with this project, that they'll find that same passion. And I know from the state judge level, when I'm actually interviewing these kids there at the state level, I mean, they are so passionate about the work that they're doing. They want to show me everything. And I'm like, I'd love to sit here and talk with you for like 20, 25 minutes about your project, but I only have 5 minutes to judge. So it's not that the judges don't want to review and take a look at what they've done, that they're proud of the product. It's just that we have limited time. And that's one thing that, if you're a leader helping the youth, don't think that the state judges are stubbing their nose at the project. That's not it at all. It's because we have only limited time. We have like 30 plus projects to judge within like an hour's time, at least at the Ohio level, and so we have limited. So, that's one of the most gratifying parts, and it's so hard to judge at the state level because they're all passionate and they all done an excellent job at the project.
Well, Deb, what's the longest that you've had a member take this project? Have you had them go 6 years?
I believe in the past we've had some go 5, maybe even 6 years. Those are the rarity. The biggest portion would be the first 2 years, and the third year you still have quite a bit, and then it sort of dies down a little bit after that.
Okay.
So, but I think, by that time kids are getting, they're getting involved with other 4-H projects, and there's so much time that you're limited to.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I really hope that they just catch that passion. Okay.
Elena, before I talk about this one, should we address that comment? Just that someone commented Deb, that it was confusing when it's confusing when there are favorite family names. And I love this example because, of course, it's somebody named Bob or somebody named
Yeah.
Robert, you know, where the father's named Robert, the son is named Robert, and maybe cousins are named Robert. So good point, actually.
Yeah, that's where you have to almost look at the brothers and sisters, where you want to research the collateral lines
Oh,
to
yeah.
make sure you are researching the right branch, because it's so easy to get off on the wrong branch. You know,
Okay.
I mean, you know, John's a common name, Elizabeth's a common name, Mary's a common name. And so you do have to do the research and try to look at the family as a unit and look who they married to make sure that you are researching the right one.
Okay.
So a very good point. It does get very confusing. I even get confused with my own family trying to do the research.
We did cross-reference this content to academic standards from social studies. I was very pleased to see that the National Social Studies standards include a category called time, continuity, and change. These two are from middle school. The first two are from middle school, and I think that last one is from high school. But they very directly relate to the activities in this book.
Okay. I guess this is me. Okay. Yes, I've already mentioned to you that how excited that this youth are who do show up to the state level. I believe from my experience, you know, there was one beginner, age 14. She was dealing with immigrant family. She was like maybe the second generation here, and she was able to go back, you know, at least 3 generations on her family. So she had very little to start with, but yet she persevered, and she's one that was self-motivated. She did not have a whole lot of assistance from her family members because they just didn't know the information. So it is possible. I also want to encourage, you know, the project completion, it's dependent on the interest and the commitment of the project helper. You know, most of them are usually just follow the main minimal requirements, but there's others go way beyond those minimum requirements, and those are the ones that, you know, are really definitely passionate about the research. You know, it's like, yeah, I was able to go back, you know, 5 more generations, and they want to show me all the pictures, they want to show me all the documents. So that is just awesome. And of course, in Ohio specifically, I'm not sure how it is with other states, we do judge on the organization as well as the presentation and adherence to the project requirements. And when I first started judging about, you know, 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, one of the judges, the past judges had said, you know, one of the things that we're looking for would be the source citations. And I'm thinking, the original booklet at that time did not have a whole lot on source citation, and which started me on the whole road to actually trying to update the book and try to include some of those. It's like, if we're asking the students to do the source citation, we better give them examples and give them tools that they can use to apply that. So, so that's one of the things that we try to stress a little bit in this booklet, a little bit more showing some examples of source citations, you know, etc. But we really want them to adhere to the project requirements. There's a checklist, and we go through as judges looking to see when they completed each of the sections, and they put a check mark and put a date when they've completed it, when they started and when they completed. So that's one way that the judges can get a quick view in terms of what has been done. And we can easily tell from interviewing them if they've done the research themselves or if they've had a whole lot of research doing it. So, but I don't know, I'm excited about the project. I get thrilled whenever the kids come in to show off their project. It just tickles me. That's the best part about the whole project that I like.
Did you say you were passionate about genealogy?
Just a little bit, yeah. Does that come through?
Yes.
And this is a passion that started, you know, I've been here at the library for nearly 21 years, but I started genealogy back in 1988. So, and I've been passionate about it since then. And I learn new things all the time. So, and I just get excited about learning and passing on my new information to youth of tomorrow, youth of today, as well as to adults. So I'm just passionate about sharing my information.
That's great. I so appreciate you sharing that enthusiasm and your knowledge.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. The word that keeps coming to mind is just wow, like how much information is not only in this book, how passionate you are, and you know how much is out there that someone could really find out about their family and their history. And I think that's really neat. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A box at this time. We have one that came in already, which was, are there pins the members can earn? And that is a fantastic question. I don't know if we have a genealogy pin, but if we don't, I can make sure that we get one, because we certainly should. I don't know, is there anything in Ohio, Jane, that's specific?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, great question. So,
Now, in terms of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, they may have like a merit badge or something that they earn here at the Ohio level.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit different than 4-H.
Yeah, so we have several project pins, and we usually try to introduce a new pin if we introduce a new topic area, but we don't bat 1,000 at that. So I'll double check that we have a genealogy one, and if not, see to it.
Okay.
If you have questions, go ahead and type them in. While we're waiting for questions, I will just make a few announcements. One is that this is being recorded, so it'll be posted on our website in about 24 hours, definitely by the end of the week if you'd like to rewatch it or share the link with any friends or colleagues. You'll also be able to download the presentation slides if you'd like to have those for reference. And then I also like to point out that on our site at Shop 4-H, in addition to a product description of this book, you can also see some sample pages. So if you'd like to see a few more pages of the book, you can head to shop4h.org and check us out there. And there Jane is holding the book up live and in the flesh. So definitely check that out. Okay. No other questions so far anyways, so I'll keep going with my public service announcements and see if more questions come in. Just another reminder that we're in the middle of our webinar series this winter. I think we're a little more than halfway through at this point, so head to Shop 4-H to watch any recordings of webinars that you may have missed or to register for upcoming webinars. As you can see, we have really passionate presenters who are really excited about the topics that they work on. So we hope that you find these valuable, and please feel free to reach out at any time with any feedback. And I believe my last announcement is just that for 4-H educators, we do have a curriculum community of practice where we meet very informally, very infrequently. It's a real low lift, but the goal of this group is to share information, share resources, talk about best practices, anything of the like. So really to create a national conversation around 4-H curriculum. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you. You can go ahead and register at that link there on your slide. And our next chat will be April 17th, and we'll be talking about peer review there. Okay, well, I guess I don't see any other questions. So Deb or Jane, do you want to have the last word here?
No, thank you for having us, and thank you, Deborah, especially.
And thank you. So hopefully I've inspired some people to go out there and work on genealogy.
No, well, you at least inspired me, so
okay.
More. But thank you both for your time. Thank you, Deb, for your great work on this book. And thanks everyone for joining today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.